Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be exploring the world of Bob Camblin. And he's this artist, and his work and philosophy are kind of like a unique lens, a way to view art and life and the whole idea of trying to understand things. Got some great sources you shared with us, so this is going to be good.
Yeah, we've got a really interesting collection here. We have excerpts from Bob Camblin quotes and other mysteries, and those give us a glimpse into his thoughts on all sorts of things. And we also have his biography, which goes into his artistic journey and the things that influenced him along the way, and he definitely took an unconventional path. Plus, to kind of round things out, we'll be looking at some interpretations of his painting, Reaching the Source, and a review of Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, this book that features his work.
Yeah, exactly. And so for you listening, it sounds like you're hoping to get a better grasp of Camblin's perspective,
Yeah.
how he saw things, and how maybe that could offer you some new ways of looking at the world, right? So our mission today is to really dig into his wisdom, the interesting paradoxes he presented, and make sure we keep things clear and engaging. No getting lost in a bunch of academic jargon.
Right.
Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, well, right away, there's this intriguing thing about Camblin. He's described as this iconoclastic and enigmatic artist, and his works are rarely available and get swiftly acquired. I mean, that mystery alone kind of makes his insights even more captivating, right? It's like there's something special there that people are drawn to.
Yeah, it definitely makes you want to delve deeper. Like, what is it about his work that creates this almost immediate demand and fascination? It definitely adds to the intrigue.
Totally. Okay, so let's jump right in with some of his quotes, because these are really something, like this one. Look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic, and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both. What do you make of that connection he's drawing there? These are fields we usually think of as totally separate, right? Science versus the mystical and all that.
Right. Well, what strikes me is how Kemlin's suggesting that whether you delve into the atom or the realm of magic, there's a common core of understanding you arrive at. It's like he's saying that philosophy and art aren't limited to one or the other, but they're present in both the scientific and the seemingly magical. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's like he's blurring the lines we often draw between these ways of understanding the world. Okay, so here's another one that really caught my eye. I will stick with common sense and try for the perfectly average view of the universe. I think that will let me enjoy miracles on both sides of science and magic, and the nuances of the smear between the whiteness and the blackness. So how does this idea of the perfectly average fit with his interest in both science and magic?
It's like he's saying, look, by aiming for this perfectly average viewpoint, he's positioning himself to appreciate both the rational explanations of science and the wonder of magic. He's not limiting himself by choosing one over the other. And that smear between the whiteness and the blackness, that really speaks to a love of nuance and how seemingly opposite ideas are actually interconnected.
Right. It's a really cool way of putting it. So now let's talk about how he defines the sixth sense. He says it's, without a doubt, senza dubio. I mean, that's pretty definitive, right? So what does that tell us about his philosophy, his approach to art?
Well, it seems like he's emphasizing the importance of intuition, of knowing something without necessarily having concrete proof. In his art and in his thinking, it seems like he placed a lot of value on that gut feeling, that instinct that goes beyond pure logic.
Yeah, it's like he's trusting that inner voice.
Hmm.
And then there's this piece of advice he offered. Find something in nature that completes you and then surrender. What do you think about his connection to nature there?
I think it speaks to the idea of finding a deep resonance with nature, something that makes you feel whole, like you belong. And then the surrender part suggests letting go of ego and allowing yourself to become one with that connection. It's like nature becomes this guide to understanding yourself.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thought. Okay, so now I want to touch on how he saw the purpose of art, because it seems like he shifted away from the traditional view. He said, art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake. So how does that redefinition influence how we see his work, his creative process?
Well, it makes art more than just something beautiful to look at. It becomes something deeply personal, almost essential to his existence. It's like art was his way of dealing with life, of finding meaning and even surviving the challenges that came his way.
Yeah, it's like his art became a necessity, a way of processing life.
Y-
He also said something really interesting about thinking. Step off the train of thought to find power, to do non-work, and laugh, truly. I mean, that really speaks to the limits of just thinking all the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about letting go of that constant need to analyze everything and allowing yourself to be in the moment, to be more intuitive and playful. And that true laugh, I think that symbolizes a release, a moment of clarity that you can only reach when you stop overthinking.
I love that. There's this other line that's really evocative, really paints a picture. Balancing and being for and against. We missed the clouds, and for a moment regretted it. Then as lightning, the mind ripped out in flashes of variations to reach the still pond. I mean, that's a whole journey right there.
And what stands out to me is how he captures that mental back and forth, that constant weighing of opposing ideas. And then there's this sense of regret, like missing out on the beauty of the present moment because you're stuck in your head. But then, boom, there's this flash of insight, this sudden clarity that cuts through all the noise and leads to a state of peace.
Yeah, it's powerful imagery. Now, these next two lines are short but pack a punch. When you think, don't act. When you act, don't think. How do you see that playing out in the artistic process, where there's always that dance between planning and doing?
I think it highlights those two distinct modes of being. Like when you're in your head, too much analysis can paralyze you. You can't create if you're constantly second guessing yourself. But then when you're acting, you need to let go of that thinking mind and just allow the creativity to flow. It's about finding that balance between intention and instinct.
So true. Okay, one last quote before we move on to his painting. The cosmos waves as me with tree leaves. Sun-heated air moves across the electrons of my skin. Sunlight reflects those greens. First, white, then yellow-green, and in deep shadows, blue. It's like he's describing this deep connection between the universe and his own experience, right down to the smallest detail.
Yeah, and what's striking is how he blends these grand cosmic ideas with these very personal sensory observations. It suggests this interconnectedness between everything, from the vastness of space to the way sunlight plays on his skin. It's a way of seeing that finds the extraordinary within the ordinary.
Exactly. Okay, let's talk about reaching the source. The interpretation describes this tranquil wooded setting with a reflective orb right in the center. And this orb has a faint reflection of a thatched roof studio inside it. Now, we're told this orb is like an Enso circle, which in Zen Buddhism often symbolizes enlightenment, the void, this interconnectedness of everything. What are your initial thoughts on that?
I'm drawn to this orb. It's like a focal point, drawing you into the scene. And that connection to the Enso circle, it points to Eastern philosophy and this idea of wholeness, of everything being connected. And then there's that reflection of his studio within the orb, which brings in a personal touch to these big abstract ideas. It's like he's saying that profound insights can be found within your own life, your own surroundings.
The interpretation goes on to say that the orb symbolizes this realization. All external journeys lead back home to the self, both physically and spiritually. And the reflection of his studio in it reinforces this idea that the entire cosmos can be perceived within the mind's clear reflection. What are your thoughts on that symbolism, that idea that the orb is like a microcosm of everything?
It's such a powerful image, this idea that the search for meaning isn't necessarily about going out and finding something external, but rather about looking inward and realizing what's already there. The orb containing the reflection of his studio is like a visual representation of that. It's like he's saying that the answers we seek are rooted in our own experiences. And that concept that the entire cosmos is reflected in a clear mind, that really speaks to that interconnectedness we talked about earlier and the potential for understanding that exists within each of us.
It really makes you think. Now, it's interesting how they connect reaching the source to the ninth ox herding picture in Zen tradition. That picture represents deep attainment. The ox is forgotten, the self is forgotten, and only natural oneness remains. The painting takes this traditional theme but presents it with a contemporary, understated aesthetic and adds a slight magical, realist, or surreal element with that floating orb. What do you make of that mix of the traditional and the contemporary?
It's like he's taking this ancient wisdom and making it relevant to a modern audience. By using that traditional imagery, he's grounding his work in a spiritual narrative, but then he adds these contemporary touches and that element of magical realism to make it more accessible and intriguing. It's not just a retelling of an old story, it's an invitation to find your own meaning in it.
Yeah, it definitely adds this layer of mystery and wonder. The YouTube analysis links the painting to hexagram 48 of the I Ching, Jing the Well, which symbolizes inexhaustible depth and renewal. And they say the orb functions in a similar way, not belonging to anyone yet serving all. So how do you see the orb and the well connecting symbolically?
Well, it's like the well is the source of life, giving sustenance to anyone who draws from it. And the orb, reflecting the source, it's universally accessible too. Both of these symbols point to something essential that's always available. And that idea of inexhaustible depth and renewal that the well represents, that perfectly mirrors what the orb seems to symbolize, that continuous potential for self-discovery. It's like they're both saying that the ultimate source of wisdom and insight isn't out there somewhere, it's within us.
Right, it's already there. Now, the video transcript makes this point that no external journey was ever needed, and the source has always been present. It even says the search itself is an illusion. And then they call the painting an ode to artistic clarity, saying that mastery involves removing what obscures essence. What do you think about that perspective on searching for enlightenment?
I think it's a really profound insight. It's this idea that the act of seeking externally can actually distract us from what's already within us. And the idea of the painting as an ode to artistic clarity, it suggests that true mastery isn't about adding complexity, but about stripping away everything that's unnecessary to reveal the essential truth. And that applies not just to art, but to life as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at Camblin's background. We know from his bio that he was born in Oklahoma in 1928 and studied at the Kansas City Art Institute, and later on, he received a Fulbright scholarship to Italy. So those early experiences, especially traveling, exposed him to all kinds of art and influences, like the Uffizi Gallery with all those classic masterpieces, and then the Capuchin catacombs with their more unusual, maybe even unsettling imagery. What do you think about the impact of those experiences?
It's amazing to think about how those early years shaped him. Seeing the classical art of the Uffizi and then the macabre imagery of the catacombs, those contrasting experiences must have really broadened his artistic perspective and influenced his later work. And then receiving the Fulbright, that's a huge recognition of his talent and potential. It's like all these things were setting the stage for his unique journey.
We also learned about his teaching career at various universities before. In 1976, he decided to fully dedicate himself to his art and become a nomadic artist. And his work evolved over time. He started with abstract impressionism and then moved into his Musci Falante series in the 1970s, which was all about optical illusions, those things some people see as floating spots or lines in their vision. And critics noticed how his style changed and how he was always drawn to themes of the life cycle, how he blended drawing and watercolor in unique ways. What do you think about that nomadic period? It seems like a really important time for him.
It makes sense. Choosing to live that nomadic life, that shows how dedicated he was to his art, how willing he was to step outside the norm, and all that traveling, seeing new places and meeting new people, that probably fueled his creativity and those shifts in style. You can almost imagine how constantly being on the move might have influenced his exploration of how we perceive things.
I know, it's fascinating to think about. Another interesting thing, he was really into collaborating with other artists. He formed B&E Productions with Earl Staley and Joe Tate, and he even signed some of his works as anonymous. So he was really challenging that whole idea of the lone artist genius and emphasizing the collective, right? And Earl Staley actually described him as this gregarious storyteller and the one who taught him how to draw and paint. So it seems like Camblin was not just this amazing artist, but also a generous teacher, right? It kind of echoes that quote about surrendering to something larger than yourself.
It does, and it's pretty radical for the art world where individual recognition is so often prized.
Yeah.
But it shows how Camblin was more interested in the process of creating and sharing ideas than getting all the credit. And hearing Staley talk about him like that, it really gives you a sense of Camblin as someone who genuinely wanted to nurture creativity in others.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now, Camblin's relationship with the art world itself was complicated, to say the least. He sometimes refused to be paid for his work and was really into these immersive solo exhibitions. He seemed to really believe in the power of faith and good work and saw challenges as stepping stones rather than roadblocks. And get this, his paintings often had hidden meanings, puzzles, and even what he called traps, meant to make the viewer think harder and question their assumptions about reality. Plus, he wanted to remake Goya in 20th century terms, which is a pretty ambitious goal.
It definitely shows how he wanted to challenge both himself and those who viewed his art. The hidden meanings and traps that suggest a playful but also serious approach to how we perceive things. And wanting to remake Goya, that speaks to wanting to tap into that deep psychological and social commentary you see in Goya's work, but through a modern lens. It's like he wanted his art to really resonate with the complexities of his time.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Okay, finally, let's talk about Zen and the art of enlightenment. The reviews highlight how Camblin's art is like koans that disrupt linear thought patterns and a tool for finding everyday enlightenment. The book encourages you to see beauty in absurdity, humor in decay, and to really embrace impermanence. It's about questioning and self-reflection and seeing beyond the surface of things.
Hmm.
So it sounds like this book really captures his overall philosophy, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Calling his art Cohen's makes perfect sense given how much he wanted to challenge conventional thinking. And that focus on finding enlightenment in everyday life, appreciating things that are often overlooked, and accepting the ever changing nature of things, that all ties back to what we've been talking about. The book is a really great way to explore Camblin's unique perspective.
So wrapping up this deep dive into Bob Camblin's world, one of the biggest themes that keeps coming up is this encouragement to shift our perspective, to look beyond what's obvious, and embrace the beauty of paradox and ambiguity.
Yeah, and we see how he connects seemingly unrelated ideas, emphasizing self discovery through nature and introspection. And that idea that our search for understanding often leads us back to realizing what was already within us.
And for you listening, hoping to gain knowledge in a way that's both insightful and efficient, I hope exploring Camblin has been interesting and maybe even sparked some aha moments. His quotes and the interpretations of his art offer a way to grasp complex ideas about perception and finding meaning without getting bogged down.
I agree. And thinking about what Camlin once said, there are no mistakes. You are doing the best you can, and mistakes are nature's way of telling you to trust your instincts, or the next mistake could be really bad. That's really interesting. Considering how much his art is about questioning and exploring, maybe the best takeaway is to approach your own understanding of the world with the same curiosity, accepting those mistakes and detours along the way. It's about the journey, not just the destination. What new questions has this exploration sparked for you? Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks for listening.